In this video, I'm going to be speaking to the chairperson and deputy leader of the Irish Freedom Party to find out what they stand for.
Using Wi-Fi without NordVPN could mean sharing your private stuff with more people than you think. NordVPN. Online security starts with a click.
The world has failed, I tell you. The world has failed yet again.
Hi, everybody, this is Crypto Rich, and like I said, I'm going to be talking to the deputy leader of the Irish Freedom Party to find out what they stand for. They are one of the new emerging parties that I think they're coming up everywhere, in the UK, in Europe, in Canada, that are standing in opposition to the WEF, the Great Reset, and the kind of insane policies that governments that have been captured by the WEF have been instituting in the UK and Ireland and the European Union and other places. Now, before I introduce him, please subscribe, follow me on Twitter, CryptoRichYT, join my official Telegram announcements channel. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please come over and support me, support my work on bit.ly/CryptoRich3Speak, bit.ly/CryptoRichOdyssey, and bit.ly/CryptoRichRumble. Those are all censorship-resistant platforms. Michael, thank you so much for making yourself available.
You're very welcome, Rich, and thanks for giving me the opportunity.
You're so
Michael
welcome.
Leahy.
Yes, you are the deputy leader and chairperson for the Irish Freedom Party.
That's correct, yes.
As a candidate in the European elections, because tragically, in my opinion, Ireland is still a member of the EU.
Very tragically, I'm afraid, yes.
I voted Brexit, by the way, just to put my cards on the table.
As did the majority of your fellow countrymen, so you're in the majority there.
Yep, but we too, like Ireland, have been captured. And I follow what's been going on in Ireland. I have childhood connections to Ireland. I have very close friends from Ireland. I haven't visited that beautiful country often enough.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll have to sort that out. We'll have to get you over here. After our victory in the European elections, we'll have to get you over here for a celebratory party.
Absolutely. As a visitor, not as a migrant flown in. God, no. All right. Do you want to say, because your background isn't in politics?
No. My background is in business. My background is in business. I'm an architect by profession. I'm also a planner, and I've been an employer for most of my life. I set up business in 1986. I'm still in business, though I'm winding down from business at the moment. And some years ago, I became a founder member of the Irish Freedom Party because I have long been Eurosceptic. And I felt that the event of Brexit was a significant opportunity for Ireland to put some distance between itself and the European Union, which has become, our association with the European Union has become quite damaging to us as far as I'm concerned. Now, Britain had a much better opportunity to leave in that it had not made the cardinal mistake of adopting the European currency. And therefore, it already had a tradable currency. For us to leave means we would have to establish a new currency, and that's easier said than done. It's not impossible, but it's a difficulty. Also, of course, Britain has a much bigger internal market than we do. And geographically now we're located an island off the mainstream of Europe, and it's difficult for us. So it's difficult for us to pull out on our own, even though many people feel that the thing has become quite damaging to our interests at a variety of different levels. There are many people in the European Union who are reaching the same conclusion, that the European Union is no longer fit for purpose. It's no longer working properly. It's no longer providing people with prosperity. It is no longer a peace project. And we see that in the very bellicose attitude taken in respect of the Ukraine war. And it's no longer a democratic project. Well, it never was really a democratic project, but it spoke at length about protecting democratic values. But in fact, it has now become something of a menace to democratic values. Many of the attacks, for example, that we see against freedom of speech emanate from European Union directives. It has very much, it's adopted a system of politics which is hidden hidden, which is secretive, which is controlled by internal vested interests, by lobby groups and by NGOs, and is not answerable to the people. Somebody like Ursula von der Leyen, who is a major player in world affairs, never has to stand before the electorate. She makes extraordinary decisions that affect the lives and the deaths of many millions of people worldwide, but she never has to answer for those decisions to an electorate, and it's the same with all of the European Commission. So it cannot talk about proper European values or democratic values.
Okay,
it is also.
Hold on, please. I'm going to push back right now. I know the answer to this, and I suspect you do. But many people who are in favor of the European Union don't get how anti-democratic it is. You are running to be a member of the European Parliament. So surely that's an indication of how it's democratic and the people's vote count and people have a say. So how can you say it's not democratic?
The European Parliament is, I think, the only parliament in the world, certainly one of the very few parliaments in history, where the parliamentarians do not have a right to propose laws. So it's called a parliament, but it's not a parliament in the sense that any Democrat would understand that term. The decision-making power still rests very much with the Commission. As I say, if I were elected to European Parliament, I will be elected to European Parliament, I would not be in a position to propose legislation. I can only discuss the legislation which has been presented by the European commissioners, who are non-elected people. So in any meaningful sense, it's not a powerful parliament. Now, it does have certain powers. What has happened up to now is that all of the people who have gone forward for European election have been Europhilic. They have promoted the Commission line. They have never rocked the boat. But you are going to see a dramatic change, I think, after these European elections. There's a significant movement throughout Europe in regard to returning powers from the central Brussels bureaucracy to the individual nation states. I think nearly every country agrees with that. But you're seeing a great deal of restive activity in countries, formerly at the core, even in Germany and in France and in Holland, where you're seeing significant Eurosceptic elements emerge. I mean, Geert Wilders being elected to the largest, having an electoral success, being elected the largest party, the Dutch Parliament, the Alternative for Deutschland now being the largest political party in Germany, the possibility of Marine Le Pen being elected in France, not to mention the significant hostility towards Europe, the Brussels bureaucracy in countries like Poland and Hungary. I believe that there will be a significant sweep of the old guard away from the European Parliament after the next election. I think there may well be a Eurosceptic majority in control at that stage. Now, Euroscepticism may or may not lead to a breakup of the European Union. Many of the parties I mentioned, such as the Alternative for Deutschland, have members which seek the abolition of the European Union completely. I would be somewhat on that line. I think what I would like to see happening is a realization, and I think that realization is there in many, many countries and among many, many people, that the European Union is no longer fit for purpose. It's no longer a democratic project. It's no longer an economically successful project. And it's no longer a peace project. And it needs to be taken apart. And I think that the countries which form part of the European Union at the moment can come together again and reconstitute what the European Union has become to something which is more democratic, to something which involves a loose cooperation in economic terms among those countries, but which allows a much broader latitude of decision-making to the individual European states.
Okay.
Much of the power of the European Union was brought... Sorry, go ahead.
Hold on, please. So,
yep.
So as an MEP, if elected, you won't be able to propose legislation.
No.
You're not able to veto legislation.
Well, no, there is you have a certain veto power. The Commission must get approval from the European Parliament. While there's a bit of a game going backward and forward between the Commission and the European parliamentarians, the Commission needs the Parliament. Probably the Parliament needs the Commission more than the Commission needs the Parliament, but the Commission does nevertheless rely on the parliamentarians on occasion. So that's important to bear in mind. It's not all one-way traffic. The parliamentarians can have a certain, with a significant blocking minority or a majority, they may well be able to tie the hands of the European Commission. Now, you could be ending up in a situation like you get in the United States of gridlock between the Republican and Democrat Party. You could end up in that kind of situation. The whip hand is still in the hands of the Commission, which is not elected. But if the parliamentarians make themselves troublesome enough, they will be able to get some concessions.
Right.
Now, I think if there is a clear, if you combine a significant Eurosceptic element within the Parliament, possibly even a Eurosceptic majority within the Parliament, with one of the major countries becoming Eurosceptic, like one of them. If France or Germany goes Eurosceptic, that's it. It's over. If Marine Le Pen gets elected to the presidency of France, then I believe the European Union is finished. I'm not sure I'd like to see that happening in a precipitate fashion, because the collapse of the European Union could be disastrous for everybody concerned. I would far prefer to see a dissolution of the European Union in an organised fashion and in a negotiated fashion between the different countries, between the different power blocks, and between the different citizenries.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Something else you said earlier about how the European Union hasn't been successful economically, because one of the things that shows up in the mainstream media in the UK, possibly in Ireland, I don't know, I don't follow the mainstream media in Ireland, is how successful the European Union has been and how Britain, on its own has suffered and we'd have been much better off. What do you say to that argument?
No, look, I mean, it has the fact of a single European market has been of significance. There's no question or doubt about that. And I would want to hold on to a single trading bloc. I think that the free trade between countries is a recipe for prosperity. But the European Union, as a share of world economy, has been falling quite dramatically over the past 10 to 15 years, from circa 34-35% some 15 years ago to about 25-26% now. And that share is falling. Now, you're also looking at a situation of both the major Western currencies, both US dollar and European and the euro, being very, you have to wonder, are they soundly based currencies anymore? They're largely based on the confidence that other states have in them. But that confidence can be shaken by international crises, in particular, such as the Ukrainian war. Wars do tend to change situations very dramatically. I would say that most Europeans now find that their standard of living has not increased, and in fact has gone on to decline for a very large number of people. There are a lot of people, even in the central, most prosperous nations of Europe, Germany and Holland, who are fuel poor, who are not able to afford the food that they were able to afford 10 years ago, who are finding it very, very difficult to heat their homes. And it's largely a question of shooting yourself in the foot. The European Union has adopted the most extraordinary, stringent green agenda in terms of entering the possibility of zero carbon, of completely eliminating the use of fossil fuels, without having any genuine alternative. When you talk about wind energy, and Ireland has very significant wind energy resources and potential tidal energy resources, but I'm fully aware we will never be able to replace our energy usage with renewables in the kind of timescales that have been spoken about. We're talking about cutting our carbon emissions, our fossil fuel use by 50% by 2030. That's only 6 years away. That just won't happen without a catastrophic impact on cost of living, on our living standards, on industrial production. We're talking about a complete elimination by between 2040 and 2050. I just don't believe it's going to happen. I'm all in favour of alternative energy sources, because for no other reason that fossil fuels are a limited asset and they will eventually run out. But I certainly don't believe we're in anything like the kind of emergency that we're being told about. So but this is what happens when you have a polity which is not democratically accountable, where people can make up these ridiculous stories about climate alarmism and where the planet is burning every 6 years left or 12 years left. And how often have we heard this? Going back to the 1970s. In the 1970s, I remember we were talking about a new ice age, and by the 1990s, it was the hole in the ozone layer and then climate alarmism and global warming. And the solution is always the same: more government control, more government power, more taxation, more restrictions on a free economy, and none of which makes any sense whatsoever. But when you have a political system that is completely ideologically driven, that never has to answer to the people, you're going to get these policies imposed. And in Ireland, we have a terrible phrase that we have international obligations, which means you're effectively not a sovereign state. And when we question the replantation of our country, we're told, oh, we have international obligations. When you actually look at these international obligations, you find they're not nearly as binding as our governments often like to claim. Governments tend to like this because it enables them to do whatever they want. and pretend to people that they have no alternative. And that's what they're doing in this country. We are told that we must bring in an unending number of migrants, despite the fact that we're a sovereign nation and know we could close our borders if we wish to. But all kinds of obfuscation is put in your way when you put that suggestion forward. And we're told that we must be good Europeans and that we must do our bit, even though we've done far more than our bit. In regard to economic prosperity, I think many people in Europe now are feeling the pinch. They are fuel poor. They are finding it very, very difficult to keep up with the levels of inflation that are building. And a lot of it has been induced by the sanctions that were imposed against Russia by the European Union, which is participating in this war and is doing itself far more damage than it's doing to the Russian economy. In fact, it's done a great deal of good to the Russian economy.
Sure. And Michael, I'd like to offer you something that isn't covered by the mainstream media, but I do talk about it on my channel and some of my other videos, which is how completely broke the ECB is. Completely broke. The European Union was in such good health that from 2014 to 2022, they had negative interest rates and zero interest rates. That's just insane economic policy. And now interest rates are going up. The Federal Reserve is raising interest rates. So money is being drained from Europe, chasing the higher yields in the United States. It's bankrupting the Europe even more. They have to raise interest rates, but of course their debt is so large, there's just no way it's repayable unless, of course, then they issue Euro bonds. And then what that will mean is they'll have to directly tax European citizens who will have the joy and pleasure of taxation without representation.
I suppose the only thing that has saved us from Europe is that it has limited enough direct taxation powers. It can impose penalties on governments, but it doesn't have direct taxation powers. But I mean, the real danger.
They want.
Of course, they've been angling for that for a long time, and they're getting there. And they keep saying that taxation is a competence of the individual states, but they're now trying to harmonise taxation policy, and set minimum budgets and minimum contributions for each nation state to give to the centre, which is, of course, taxation by another name. But yes, you will have that dreadful situation. I mean, how stable the European currency is, I don't know. You'd be in a better position to comment on that than I would. I long believe that the United States currency is in for a serious fall. I think when that happens, the European Union currency will come under the same pressure. But it's inevitable because they're not really self-functioning economies. An awful lot of what they do is based on confidence and based on the fact that they have been prosperous, and it may come to a very abrupt halt very suddenly. And as I say, wars do tend to change things. There's a major European war going on, and Europe is heavily involved in it in terms of subsidizing one side, as indeed is the United States. And I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do that. I'm certainly not sure we're going to be able to continue to do it. So one needs to be aware. Of what's going to happen. These things can dramatically change. The attitude of people to the European Union can change overnight. Ireland has been supportive of the European Union, supportive of our membership of the European Union, but largely because Euroscepticism has often been praised in terms of, well, you want to leave Europe. And of course, if Ireland leaves Europe, it's isolated. But I think we've got to move away from that position and say, look, the European Union as it stands needs to be abolished. And that way nobody is left out, nobody is abandoned on the outside. For a small open trading economy like ours to be abandoned, to be on your own, it's a different position to be in. I mean, our only trading partner then would be our nearest neighbour, Britain, and the United States, and you would be very much depending on the kindness of strangers, which mightn't always work out for you. So people are reluctant. They would be reluctant if you asked Irish people today, "Do you want to leave the European Union tomorrow?" They would say no, because the idea of being left outside, the idea of having for a small country to establish a new currency, to establish new trading links, it would be a very traumatic period. But if you talk about a significant reformation of the European, I know the European Union has been designed to resist reform, but if enough countries are there, and if there's a Eurosceptic majority in the Parliament, and if one of the major countries falls, I think it will fall. But I hope that fall is not a crash. I hope that it's not a complete collapse, because that would be catastrophic for everybody. And I mean, the warning sign was there when Britain walked, and it walked because it couldn't negotiate a sensible deal with European partners who were completely inflexible. And it arises from the very strong core of Franco-Germany, which has been functioning as a single state for the last 20 years or so.
Yes.
And having been at each other's throats for the previous 100 years, they suddenly patched it up and decided that they wanted to dominate everybody else. They do very much a colonial impetus.
Hold on, Michael. Sorry, I want to move this on to Ireland, right? I just want to say Greece
Yeah.
should have walked, right? And I think the euro is in much worse state than the dollar, but that's a whole other conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So Ireland, you mentioned earlier the migrants. Now,
Yes.
what's wrong with us having asylum seekers and taking care of them? And
Yep.
I mean, what's going on in Ireland that you object to in that regard?
It's the extent of it. Ireland now has a higher proportion of people born outside the country than any other country in history. The United States, at its peak of immigration, which was around 1907, 1908, that kind of time, the total number of people in the United States born outside of the United States was 14 or 15%. In Ireland, it's now 20%. So in regard to the key demographic, the working age demographic, say between the ages of 19 and 39, the number of people in Ireland born outside of Ireland is about 33%. That's 1 in 3. And of course, that's the most productive in terms of reproduction. It's the most productive in terms of work. And we will probably be looking at a situation of 50-50 much more sooner than we think. Just in terms of normal demographics, normal reproduction, number of kids per family, immigrants coming into a country will always have far more children than the native population. Irish demographics are birth rates have fallen through the floor in many other European countries. But in addition to the fact that 1/3 of the people in that key cohort are born outside the country, we're still importing vast numbers of people. Why, I don't know. But
where are they from? And I've heard they're mostly men. Which countries are they from?
Yes, there's a huge number of people. There's two processes. One is the Ukrainian war situation. We placed no upper limit whatsoever on the number of people we took in, and we've taken in something like 100,000 Ukrainian immigrants. We've taken in 250,000 people in the year 1923 from all parts of the world, doing asylum seekers, international protection. The asylum seeking regime is based on the 1951 and updated 1967 UN protocols on asylum, which were put together at a time when cheap air travel didn't exist. Now people are simply showing up without documentation. They board a plane in Germany or somewhere. They arrive into the continent of Europe. They board a plane, a Ryanair flight from Germany, and they get on the plane with their passports. And when they arrive in Ireland, they don't have their passports. I speak to air traffic maintenance people close to Shannon Airport, close to where I live. And they tell me that the biggest job they have when they try to clean out a plane is flushing out the passports from the toilets, which have been pulped down there. And of course, they've locked the toilets very quickly. So these people arrive, they claim they've lost their passports, they claim their passports were taken by people traffickers, and we have to take them in under the present conditions of the asylum protocol. But of course, this is something we could pull out of any time we want. We're a sovereign nation. We do not need to stay with the asylum protocol. If it's no longer working, or if it's obviously being gamed, which is obviously the case, then we should stop it. Frequently, these people come.
I understand they're coming mostly. Apart from the Ukrainians, there's Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who claim to be Ukrainians who can't speak Ukrainian. There's a lot of people who look much more like Somalians than Ukrainians, but they tell us they're Ukrainians. They arrive without passports and they say they're from Ukraine, and we don't have the wit to figure out that they're not actually from Ukraine when they can't speak Ukrainian, when Ukraine doesn't have a significant Muslim population, but a huge number of people who arrive here are Muslims. So, why is that? Or why Ukraine doesn't have a major black population? A huge number of the people who arrive here claiming to be Ukrainian are black. Fair enough, it's obvious that they're gaming the system now,
Michael, has this? It seems to me this has accelerated in the last few years because
it's very much accelerated in the past 2 or 3 years.
Why? Who's doing this and why?
These are very difficult questions to answer. You will see a huge number of military-aged men, young men. And, you can recognize somebody with military training. I was in Dublin Airport there, I'd say it's 8 months ago, and I was just astonished at the number of military-looking people around the place and arriving into the country. And you can tell a military guy by the way he carries himself, by his haircut, whatever the hell it is, you can always tell a guy who is or was a soldier. And there's a huge number of them. And you have to wonder, is this part of some kind of a plan to bring in a group of people who will be suddenly given guns and uniforms and told to keep the paddies down? You just don't. I have no idea what's going on. It's very hard to It makes no sense at any level, and it's very hard to explain it at any level. It's very hard to explain what's going on or who is actually behind it.
Okay,
Um,
we're immigrants. I was born in Pakistan, as were my brother and my sister.
yeah,
My mum
yeah.
was a lecturer in Pakistan. My father came here as an accountant for the embassy in Pakistan. So he came as a diplomat. We came in, in the early 70s. We settled, we stayed. And like many people in the 60s and 70s from the Caribbean and India and Pakistan, they came to the UK because the economy was expanding.
Yep.
And people were needed to drive the buses and to be the nurses and doctors and stuff like that. So is that what's going on with these people? Because I don't get the sense that Irish economy is expanding and growing and needs labor.
You see, there's an awful lot of people who have legitimately entered the country. There are people who enter the country under the international protection regime and under the asylum regime, and they're the big numbers in recent years. But in addition to that, we have been importing people, particularly to work in our hospitals and for other labor purposes as well, with visas, and that's all perfectly legitimate. One of the reasons, however, that we need people to staff our health regime is that our own doctors are given such dreadful working conditions that they leave the country. Many of them want to come back to the country, but they pay in conditions. The housing is so expensive that they can't afford to come back. So you have this absurd situation that highly qualified doctors who have been paid for or had a substantial portion of their education paid for by the Irish taxpayer. They're leaving Dublin Airport at the same time as these large numbers of people are coming in from various other parts of the world to fill their jobs, which is an absurd situation. This makes no sense at any level for a country to behave like that, to export your own people on the basis that you'll get cheaper labour from abroad. I mean, why do you educate the people to that extent in the first place? And of course, you're taking people out of those countries who are highly skilled and are perhaps needed in those countries. So it's not a healthy situation. What we're doing, it makes no sense at any level. In terms of the international protection regime, the reason we become so popular is because our social welfare system is actually very generous, particularly with regard to Ukrainian people. Ukrainian people come in here to get medical cards, they have free medical care, they get free third level education, things that Irish people have to pay for and pay hard for. So it really makes no sense. People are getting very, very angry with it, and to a large extent, Irish people are becoming treated as second-class citizens by their own government.
I can see that as a recipe for conflict. Now,
yes.
Politically, I would have said certainly before lockdown, I'm from the left wing. My
Yes.
heroes were Tony Benn and George Galloway. I
Yep.
joined the Labour Party to support Jeremy Corbyn. As soon as he was ousted in a coup, that's it, I left. But now I don't think left and right apply so much. It's more about liberty and, autonomy and sovereignty versus an overreaching state that wants to micromanage every single aspect of people's lives. And for me, I think it's shocking and disgusting that a largely homogenous, peaceful country like Ireland, beautiful culture, beautiful people, terrible weather, is having this influx of people that aren't Catholic, don't necessarily speak English, right? Aren't conversant with the local traditions and everything. And then it's a little bit like, the open borders didn't work for India when the British arrived. Open borders didn't work for Africa when all the Europeans came. Open borders didn't work for North America. And it certainly didn't work for Tasmania, when the British came, they hunted every single Tasmanian Aborigine like they were animals and killed every single one. So then what you have, I think, is the destruction of local tradition and culture and conflict. And this is it's like a recipe for conflict. And then you have the ruling class, the oligarchs in Ireland, able to rule over people because they've set them fighting against each other.
No, I mean, I was up at a little place in Newtown, Mount Kennedy. It's a small village in Wicklow, which is part of the constituency, the Ireland South constituency they're campaigning for. And there's an iPass in the international protection system being put in there. And in the grounds of an old building. And it's going to be 64 men, but they're all going to be living in tents. And of course, the local residents are terrified of this. These are all young military-age men. Nobody knows where they came from. Nobody knows what their culture is. And they're actually terrified. And they're protesting about this and trying to stop it. And I was looking at the video of it there today, and guards brutalizing people who are protesting, not letting them have any say in how their own community is being run, and importing these people into the country who are allowed to live in an area that nobody will ever get planning permission for, simply and purely because they're refugees. And one of the things that the government did was some 6 years ago, they introduced a regime. Normally, if you want to build a building or have somebody living in an old house, change its use from an old house to a multi-occupancy house, you have to have planning permission. You have to show that you have the services, that the traffic infrastructure that can be handled, that you have adequate education infrastructure, and so on and so forth. But suddenly, this can be done without planning permission. Now, any local developer wanting to build houses for the local community has to go through the ringer of the planning system. It's a very, very onerous process. But if a government wants to put an international protection regime in place with 200 people, then they don't need planning permission. Normally, in the planning process, the local community can have a say in what's done. They can object. They can get their councils to represent their interests. But in this situation, you can't. So you have the strong arm of the state overruling the wishes of small local communities. And it's tragic. This is a small rural community, 200 people, which is being swamped by 64 people coming in to live here in what would be dreadful conditions, with no facilities whatsoever. So needless to say, these people are terrified. They're very worried about what's happening to their community. And the right, somebody set a building on fire there last night. And you really, whenever there's a problem, somebody starts a fire, and you really wonder who's doing it. Because I know the people who are there, and I know perfectly well they're not arsonists. They just wouldn't do that kind of thing. And you have to wonder, is this a false flag operation in order to justify a heavy-handed police action? Because suddenly the riot squad is brought in, and they don't take any prisoners, and when they're brought in, they will just bulldoze their way through the local community, and it's a dreadful.
Those police officers, that riot squad, they're local people. They're Irish people.
You see, this is the thing. The riot squad will not be local people. They'll be brought in from outside, and that's the excuse is that they're brought in from outside because of this so-called arson. But again, you really wonder who's behind that and who's doing it, because nobody has ever been charged with these arson attacks. But a lot of these facilities have been subject to arson, and it's the far right is blamed for this. But who's doing it, we don't really know.
You and I both, Michael. We're both far right. I'm sorry. You and I both. We're both far right. I am also a white supremacist, apparently, as well.
Yes. A remarkable achievement, Rich, I must say. But no, I mean, this term far right is being used to describe almost anybody who disagrees with government or with the government narrative now, and it's wearing very thin. I think people are getting very tired of it. The media is losing its power. It really is losing its power, and people who use that term are being seen through very, very easily. But no, it's awful to see. I mean, I was up in that place in Newtown on Kennedy a couple of weeks ago, and they're just ordinary local people who are concerned about their community, and they're being portrayed as fascists and far right and arsonists, and it's just nonsense. It's just nonsense.
Absolute nonsense. Because Ireland, it has been a victim of British colonialism. It's never been a colonial power itself. It doesn't have the sort of arrogance, imperial legacy that I think runs through the British elite. Okay, now I want to move on, right? Because we've about 10, 15 minutes left. But I want to talk about other policies that you have, and just really an opportunity for you to say what else the Irish Freedom Party stands for.
Well, in regard to the Freedom Party, we are a democratic party. One of the reasons I became involved in politics because of the burgeoning attacks against free speech. Some 4 years ago, the government floated this idea of a hate speech legislation. Now, we already have and have had since 1989 an effective anti-incitement legislation, which means that if anybody incites violence against any named person or any group of people, then it can be charged with an offence. And that's worked quite well, and we don't get incitement of violence. People do not incite violence against fellow people, and it's regarded as something you just don't do. But that's to be expanded very dramatically in two ways. First of all, a series of protected groups are to be put forward. And they will be protected on the basis of sexuality, gender, ethnicity, religious belief, and some others, gender identity as well, And if you make a comment which could be construed as being offensive to those groups, you can be prosecuted. And it's very, very broad, or which could be seen to be engendering hatred to those groups, or which is motivated by hatred towards those groups, you can be prosecuted. Now, oddly enough, political affiliation is not one of the protected classes. So you're introducing this a two-tier system of law. Some people will be protected and other people will not be protected. But nobody knows what hatred is. The legislation doesn't define what hatred is. And it was passed almost overwhelmingly by the Parliament, but then people began to read it and began to see what was involved in it. And it would create an absolute circus of chaos within the police force. I think this is something similar has happened in Scotland in the last weeks, where in the first few days, in 8,000 companies, everybody with a chip in their shoulder would be lining up to make complaints under this legislation, and to have people prosecuted under this legislation. It'll be a blackmailer's charter. And it'll be a bully's charter, and it would be used overwhelmingly against certain groups and in favour of other groups. And I think we all know who the favourite groups in society are today. But of course, that can change. Things can flip around very easily, and the people who are in favour today may well not be in favour in 5 or 10 years' time. But the law is just manifestly unjust and manifestly wrong. It has, I think, begun to waken people up. I think even government backbenchers are beginning to see that this is a step too far, but the government is not backing down on it. They want to impose this. And this largely comes from the European Union. It comes from European Union directives on the integration of various peoples. The way we implement European Union legislation tends to be very draconian, tends to be very conservative, and tends to be very damaging. So that's one of the areas we are, and this is a major row in Ireland at the moment. As I say, people are beginning to wake up to it. People are finally beginning to see through the government. They're finally beginning to see that the government is not necessarily acting in the interests of the people, and they're beginning to be quite suspicious of what the government is up to. That's why the elections coming up on the 7th of June are very important. They do give the people an opportunity. They're a bit like a midterm election. There's local elections, there's European elections. And there is an opportunity to give the government a bloody nose, and I think the people are going to take it. We had some referenda recently in Ireland where the government wanted to redefine what a family was, or redefine what marriage was, and they were both overwhelmingly defeated by the people, much to everybody's surprise, certainly much to the government's surprise. But I think it was very much a reaction to what you might call the woke agenda. And people did strike back, and I have a feeling they're going to do the same in the elections on the 7th of June. At least I hope they will.
Me too.
So that is an opportunity. We are a Eurosceptic party. We want to see a significant repatriation of power from the European Union. As I said before, the European Union has been designed to resist democratic structures. It's been designed to prevent repatriation of power. But it has to happen because I think the European Union has become top-heavy. It's become excessively bureaucratic. It's become ideologically driven by the worst kind of poorly thought out ideology, mostly relating to climate and wokery and all the nonsense that we've been fed up to our gills with for the past years.
Just on the climate stuff. So, I have voted green in the past. I won't vote green again. We do have solar panels, and I cycle around and I drive a Prius. We got the solar panels installed years ago, right? I wouldn't vote green again. But isn't it funny how the continent, which doesn't have any appreciable hydrocarbons, wants the rest of the world, everybody, to do without hydrocarbons. Yeah. So no surprise there. The Europeans, this is their great civilizing mission for the 21st century, using the climate change agenda in order to impoverish the rest of the world, just like they used Christianity in the 18th and 19th century to impoverish the rest of the world and steal their resources. Yeah. Very interesting.
No, it is strange, and there was the interview with Guyana, the president recently.
Oh, Michael, you've gone on mute.
There was the
interview with
the president of Guyana.
Yes,
the BBC interviewer was
I saw that
for wanting to use oil, and he was.
Oh, you've gone on mute again, Michael.
Sorry about that. That the Europeans want everybody else to do without their comforts and their industrialization. Now that Europe has industrialized and has done all this damage, they want everybody else to stop. It's very much a colonial mindset, and it really is absurd. I don't buy into the carbon or into the climate alarmist message at all. I think the evidence is very, very tenuous at best. I think we have a good reason for moving away from fossil fuels in that they will eventually run out.
I invite
yeah.
you to look into abiotic oil. See, you know that sometimes people say to me, "Oh, well, there's the consensus on climate change." Well, of course, there's a consensus because everybody who dissents is censored or deplatformed. YouTube will delete videos that challenge the climate change agenda. So of course there's a consensus, just like consensus during lockdown and stuff. Well, that just shows the weakness of their arguments, that it can't stand up to criticism. And one thing I've been looking into and invite you to look into at some point is abiotic oil. That oil is actually formed by minerals and is the second most abundant liquid on the planet after water.
Okay.
Maybe.
Okay.
Anyway,
okay. I will look into that certainly. Okay.
When is the general election in Ireland?
Well, the general election has to be held before March of next year. Many people feel the government may fall before then. If they do very badly in this European election, I think they probably will try and hang together. If they do well, they may well say, well, look, let's go for an election in September. I have a feeling they won't do well in the European elections, and I think they probably will hold on to next March. And they will probably they will try to have a giveaway budget sometime in October, November, that kind of time, in order to buy votes. Now, one of the things is that Sinn Féin, who are a hard left party and a Marxist party, are waiting in the wings. They're now the largest party in the country in terms of percentage vote. They were up to about 32 or 3% in the polls. They're now down about low to mid-20s. We, in what would be called the far right or the nationalist right, have seriously hit Sinn Féin.
Sovereignty.
Yeah, the sovereign, shall we say? I'm actually coming to accept this far right term. It's not so bad. At least people know. I think so many people have said when they hear a description of the far right, well, I believe in that. So I believe in protecting our borders.
It's insane. Things like religion and family. Independence and self-sufficiency. Those are now far right ideas. But my mind here is.
I mean, they believe in free speech. They must be fascists. I mean, what do these people have the remotest idea of what fascism is? When did you hear Mussolini or Hitler advocating for free speech or for return of powers to the individual nation states? And yet they call people who advocate for free speech, they call free speech a far right value. It's just absolutely astonishing. They're the most ignorant people politically that you could possibly come across. Look, I'm beginning to accept the term. I don't really object to it very strongly anymore. Even when I'm canvassing and people know what you stand for, I say, well, we're what radio television share, and that's our television. So we're what they would call far right, and I think they then understand that you're probably okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Okay, now you were saying about Sinn Féin. So are they the likely inheritors, or is it too early?
Well, I think that they would have been until very recently, but they've made some very serious mistakes. They did not read the public. They have been traditionally very good at reading the public mood, very cynical. But they did not read the public mood in immigration. They're very strongly pro-immigration, and they had their own natural supports would be working class based, but the working class were absolutely fed up with what was happening, and they came out very strongly against it. And Sinn Féin lost a lot of support on that. Secondly, on the issue of free speech and the hate speech bill, again, Sinn Féin absolutely backed it to the hilt, and people began to get very annoyed about that. Sinn Féin were very much pro-lockdown. There was a kind of an emerging political movement at the time of the lockdown, and the vaccinations, mandating vaccinations that led to a certain political awareness that has now morphed into a lot of the positions that we're taking against the government narrative and the resistance to the government narrative. But Sinn Féin, again, were very much on hard. They were actually trying to push the government to more draconian lockdowns and more repressive legislation. So I think that they've lost a lot of support on those three issues. They still have a significant core support. They're still probably the most popular party, but they're well below what would get an overall majority. They're at about 20, maybe 24% in the polls, and I think that may be slightly exaggerated. The European elections will tell a lot as to what their core support actually is.
Okay,
so
and then parties like the Irish Freedom Party, even if you don't capture 20% or whatever, you can shift the mood.
Yes, well, that's
leverage.
that's what we're trying to do. Even if we don't get people elected this time, if we do succeed in getting a significant vote, we will have to be taken seriously. We'll have to get airtime, and we'll have to get be taken more seriously by the media and by the other parties. They already have shifted their policies in response to us. They're already the parties of the government are beginning to toughen up on immigration. They're beginning to wind back on some of the things that they were saying, and they are beginning to listen to us, and they are beginning to adopt some of our policies and to vet people more carefully and to look at speeding up the deportation process or speeding up the hearings process. They're beginning to do that at long last. Of course, they're not acknowledging the fact that we forced them to that position, but that is actually the case, and I think people realise it.
Yes. Well, hopefully, people will see through that. I just think they're just pretending, or they're capitalizing, and then should people fall for it come the next general election, we got another, I don't know, 5 years or so of a WEF captured government. So I want to thank you so much, Michael, for taking this time.
You're very welcome.
Is there anything you want to say before we finish up? Anything we haven't covered?
No, I just think that there is a mood of change sweeping throughout Europe. I think Britain was to the vanguard in realising the difficulties of the European Union. Brexit has been a very difficult path, and I know perfectly well the Irish government has been very, very much more difficult than it could have been. Instead of taking Brexit as an advantageous position for Ireland, where we could have moved to detach ourselves slightly from the worst aspects of the European Union, we played completely hardball, and we were used by the European in efforts to undermine Britain's efforts to leave in unfavourable terms. So the way we behaved was dreadful as far as I'm concerned. But I think there is a mood of change sweeping through Europe. People are waking up to the fact that the European Union has lost its direction, that it's not democratic, it's not promoting prosperity, and it's not promoting peace. So I think there will be significant change after this European Parliament election.
Good.
Now, as I said, the European Parliament is not very powerful, but it does have some leverage. And if, as I say, one other major country falls, it goes in the direction of Italy. If you take it, if Italy becomes, if one other European country goes in that direction, I think it will embolden Italy as well. If either Germany or France or Spain goes in that direction, and I think that could easily happen, then I think you will see very radical change in the European Union, possibly to the point of its abolition, which I think would be no harm. I think I would like to see the European countries coming together again and renegotiating an open trading arrangement, which is really all that Europe should ever be. There should never be the concept of united. European Union was a bad idea. European Economic Community was as far as it should have gone. Changing it to the European Union and giving it the legal architecture of a state was a big, big mistake. It's tied the hands of far too many countries. It is dominated by a handful of countries, namely France and Germany. Yep. Even major players like Italy or Spain are not able to have anything like the same role. And Britain did not have the same role as either France or Germany when it was a member, and I think that's one of the reasons that they walked. So, but I think it's changing. I think many countries are fed up with the whole process. Many countries have been very poorly treated by Europe, such as Hungary, such as Poland, such as Greece, and such as Ireland. We were robbed blind during the economic crash. We were forced to take on the banking debts of the Franco-German banks, which we had no legal obligation to do whatsoever. But we were pretty much told if we didn't, our economy would be destroyed. We were basically threatened, and we had no choice. And it utterly turned into an absolutely enormous threat. Yep.
Well, Michael, listen, thank you. I wish you the very best. You're in the Ireland South constituency for the MPs, and I look forward to following the progress of the Irish Freedom Party. And
thank you very much, Rich. Thank you very much.
I'll have all the links in the description below for the Irish Freedom Party, so please
do
go ahead and support them. And between now and when I see you next, please keep filling your pockets with freedom. This is this has never been said to him before. This is Crypto Rich and Crypto Michael signing out. All the best.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye now. Bye.